Hello, thanks for listening to our new show. Something we value here at Drumbeat is the wide variety of skilled practitioners who work within the school. To highlight this, I'll be spending the next few weeks talking openly with just a small selection of specialist staff here about their area of expertise and some interesting talk about their work. You're listening to Drumbeat Discovers. My name's Cornell and I'm a deputy head here at Drumbeat. In this episode, I'll be having a chat with Kathryn Stevenson, our school-based clinical psychologist, about puberty. I'm going to welcome Kathryn into the studio now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you introduce yourself and explain a little bit about what you do here at Drumbeat?
Yep, my name's Kathryn Stevenson. I'm the clinical psychologist here at Drumbeat, and that means I work with the students here, with teachers, with families about all sorts of things to do with behaviour and emotions.
I wanted us to chat today about puberty and how it can affect children and young people with autism. And I know that it's a very broad topic and a big area and can affect children in lots of different ways. But are there sort of common themes of how puberty can affect young people with autism, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think for one thing, teenage years, puberty, adolescence, for all young people is or can be a difficult time. It's a time of hormonal change. It's a time of sort of changing relationships with families, that your peers become more important and you want to become a bit more independent. It's a time when schoolwork increases, when sleep patterns change, all sorts of changes that affect all sorts of teenagers. And those things also affect our young people with ASD. I think in addition, students with ASD have to manage the impact of their ASD at that time. So things like maybe communication is quite difficult, so understanding what's going on is harder for them. Relationships can be more difficult. So having that sort of peer group and the importance of that can be more difficult for our students, and learning from their peers about puberty and what goes on in puberty. Being able to separate from their parents can be harder.
Just thinking about some of the physical changes that happen in puberty, and obviously that's a massive part for any young person. But like, as you mentioned, communication, for some of our students, that's even harder for them to understand what's happening within their own bodies.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
how would you say that can present itself? Can it affect behaviour sometimes?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there seems to be around a sort of 30% increase in sort of behaviours of concern when young people hit puberty with ASD. So yeah, I think there can be, not necessarily, but there can be a knock-on impact.
How might those sort of different behaviours present themselves? Would you say, what sort of things might we see or might parents experience?
I think it come out in lots of different ways. I mean, for certainly lots of our students, it's not a particularly difficult time. But for some students, it might be that there's sort of an increase in challenging behaviour. It might be that they get more anxious, and that might come out as more sort of ritualistic behaviour, or getting tearful or upset. It might be that they start being a lot more aware of their difficulties as well around that age. Certainly, I think for some of our more able students, it's when they start really noticing that they're different from mainstream peers or maybe their siblings, and questioning what that's about. I think another key area is around sort of PMT and periods for girls, and helping them to really understand what that's all about and why they might feel particularly wobbly at a certain time in the month, and knowing that that's to do with their period. And for boys, there's also about having sort of and for girls, but sort of sexual frustration, and helping them and educating them around that.
You mentioned earlier on when we started talking about how relationships can change during puberty. Obviously, that relationship could change between parents and their young person, or this puberty has arrived, how would
Yeah.
you sort of recommend or suggest that parents can perhaps find a way into talking to their own young person, or communicating with them about puberty and what's going on for them?
Yeah. I think the first thing is to be ready and be prepared that puberty will be happening to your young person, and they will be getting all those feelings like any other teenager. And starting early, so thinking about when you might want to start talking about things, and really trying to do that before things have happened, because I think once somebody's body starts changing, that could be quite scary if they don't know what's happening. So yeah, getting ready, getting prepared to talk. And really, it's, I think, for our students, some of the stuff that might seem obvious might not be obvious to them. So teaching about personal hygiene, and that they're going to need to wash more, teaching about what feelings they might get when they get their period and PMT, and using really concrete literal language can be really useful as well. Otherwise things can just get quite confusing. I know there's an awful lot of names for all sorts of private parts, and that can be very confusing for our students. So I think it's also really important that we start teaching them a bit more about how to say no and how to be assertive, because increasingly as they get older, they might be in situations that are could be confusing and could potentially make them a little bit vulnerable. So if they're starting to go out to clubs on their own a bit more, then teaching them the sort of signals of when something feels okay and when it doesn't feel okay, and finding a way that they can say no. I think we spend a lot of time in schools and at home teaching our children to say yes and be compliant and do what we want them to do, and it's important when they're reaching teenage years to start teaching them that it's okay to say no if it doesn't feel okay.
We've mentioned some of the behaviours that parents might see during puberty, and those things that could happen, and perhaps for some of our students that have quite severe autism, about things like appropriate behaviour in public. So because of the senses that might be going on in their body, they might feel the need to take off all of their clothes, or they might touch themselves in public because they're not aware of the inhibitions or the kind of the social cues of that isn't the right thing to do. And that, I think that has come up before from parents, that is a concern. Is there a way?
Awareness of what's appropriate and not. Yeah, definitely. And also I think touching other people, it's a time that maybe teenage boys suddenly become very interested in the female body, but they haven't got that understanding that you're not supposed to touch. So yeah, and that can be incredibly embarrassing, incredibly difficult to manage, especially if your young person looks pretty much like a full-grown adult and maybe it's not very obvious that they've got any additional needs. So yeah, it's really common, I think. In terms of how to manage that, something that can work really well is teaching the distinction between public and private, and what's a private space and what's a public space, and what's the public and private parts of the body, and the different behaviours, and also about sort of different levels of relationships. So something we use quite a lot is the idea of different circles of relationships, and who's in your middle circle. Might be, that might be a girlfriend or boyfriend, and what's okay to do with them, and then moving out to family and more distant, and using that as a way of plotting what's appropriate behaviour at each point.
So if we do a little plug for our puberty workshop in May next year, then we can perhaps talk more with parents about individual cases and perhaps give some more advice and support then. But if they're in need now, they can contact you at school.
Yeah, definitely. And in that workshop we will, there's all sorts of different visual resources that we as a school have pulled together, and different strategies that we can talk about in a lot more detail and share.
Thanks for coming in this morning, Kathryn, and talking about puberty.
Thank you for having me.
If any of the issues that we've talked about today are affecting you and your family or your young person, and you would like some more support, please feel free to contact the school. You can do this via our website at drumbeatasd.org. Just want to say a quick thanks to Roland, our producer here, and also thank you to you for listening. Remember to tune in next week to hear from another one of our specialists. Make sure you find the podcast either on our YouTube page at youtube.com/Drumbeat Media or visit our website for more podcasts, videos and information about what we do here at Drumbeat School and ASD service. The song featured in this episode was Green Lights by Jazar. This is a Drumbeat Media production.